All right. Well, thank you all for joining us in this conversation. We got started a little bit late. Just to let you know, everyone here has given consent. This is a pre-recorded video. It will be shared through our newsletter to our various community members. And in addition to that, on YouTube, it will also be shared here with our two guest speakers, Phoenix J and Haj Flemings, for their purposes of sharing if they so choose. So I will just share a little bit about myself. I am Krista McClure, and I am the Director of Programs at Arts Business Collaborative. Arts Business Collaborative is really focused on uplifting Black, Latina, and Indigenous artists and communities across the nation and supporting them through their arts and or STEM business. How do we move them kind of from vision to fruition to productivity? That is objectively what we're focused on and supporting through that fiscal sponsor. We serve as a fiscal sponsor. And what a fiscal sponsorship looks like, as you might be an individual, a visionary, a creative that has an idea of what you would like to see happen with a model or project. And you may need support through that, a fiscal sponsorship. And that is where we step in. We serve as a fiscal sponsor. In addition to our fiscal sponsorship, we host things like this. Um, Help Desk, and Help Desk is designed where we invite wonderful expert leaders in their field. In this case today, we have two experts that will speak to their best ability, to their best knowledge around AI. And we also have a myriad of other topics that we cover, whether it's finance, whether it's business development, and even understanding how to approach funders at the national philanthropic level, but even at the federal level when it comes to securing dollars to support your vision, your project. And I will kick it off to Phoenix to do their introduction as a panelist.
Thank you for that introduction, Krista. I'm Phoenix J, and I'm in the data and AI world. I'm also on the board for ABC and advocating for STEM. I'm excited to be here for this conversation. I think it's really important that we discuss the ways that AI touches all of our lives. And so thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I would like to punt it over to Haj as well.
All right, hello. It is great to see everybody. I am a Detroit native. I play in the space of branding and technology. I run a company called Rebrand Cities and Rap versus AI. We do a lot of digital transformation, and we really leaned a lot into AI. So we're really helping cities and small businesses better navigate this new space.
Wonderful, thank you. And Michael and Bianca, since there's just the two of you here, if you want to just do a brief introduction of who you are and where you might be situated in the States.
I'll go. I'm Michael. I am in Detroit, actually in Ferndale, right outside of Detroit. I am a commercial real estate executive in the city of Detroit, and also just recently launched a brand to kind of explore cultural bridges between Detroit and Italy, because I am first generation Italian on my father's side, and then Detroit on my mother's side. So and Haj is a dear friend, and I saw his. I'm sitting here at my desk, so I saw it pop up in his IG, and I was like, I'll hop on that.
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
Good to see you, Mike.
All right, you too.
Bianca?
So I'm Bianca. I am also in Michigan. I'm like a little bit outside of Troy, and I currently am working for DraftKings in customer experience. And I know Haj. Well, I don't personally know Haj. We went to Michigan Tech, so it was like two different periods, but he's a alumni.
Nice.
So he's trying to say I'm older than she is. It's all good. It's all good.
Love it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. I love how Michigan, essentially Detroit is in the house. I'm feeling it. All right. Well, I want to go ahead and dive right in and start to have.
Man, we got another person. We got one more person in there. Another friend I see.
Pierre Dubois.
Welcome. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Just saw this, just so I would listen in. So, Haj, everybody, pleasure to see you.
Thank
right.
you. All right, so we're gonna dive in a little bit. I believe either Haj or Phoenix may have a presentation or deck that they can share with us. And then from there, we will go into a bit of a Q&A. The Q&A is open to all participants to be able to join in and chime in and, ask probing questions to gather insight and feedback for yourself or for your community, your network. And I also have a set of questions that I'll be learning along with you as well. So I'll let Haj go ahead and kick it off a bit with the presentation if you have one.
Yeah. I'm just gonna show just a few slides, and then we're gonna get into an engaging conversation. Me and Phoenix had a chance to be able to kind of chop it up a little bit to kind of level set a few things, and so we're super excited. So I'm gonna do a quick screen share, and we'll just do it. All right, got that. You know what? Let me get back out of it. But there's a little bit of sound, so let me make sure I click share sound. All right, and I just want to share just a few of these since we're doing something in the creative space. I'm gonna play this real quick, and you're gonna hear a little sound here. I'd like to access the microphone. Absolutely. Okay, try this. All right, I'm not hearing the sound, but you know what I'm saying. But it kind of speaks to a cover that was done. A lot of you might have heard the cover that had Jay-Z, right? And so there's a lot of conversation around artists and is AI going to replace the human component, the artist, the creative, the person who is creating the actual content or music, right? That's one aspect of it. It could also be in design as well too. So that is something that we're going to start to see happen more and more. And I had like a little piece in that. Part of what we have to kind of understand is that the world has been transformed by some major events. Part of that is going to play into COVID, which is kind of changing, I would say, customer behavior, the way we interact as a society. And so you start to see more Zoom usage and more technologies in terms of working remotely. And these things are going to filter into the creative space as well, too, as people got used to doing things a little bit differently, right? So as a part of that, ChatGPT came out, or it was released on November the 30th. And part of the conversation that we're going to talk about today is AI is not something that's new. It's been out since the 50s. The term was coined in 1965, but we'll get into more of those, nuclear details. But it got put in the hands of regular everyday people on this day when ChatGPT was released. In terms of how fast it got adopted, in 5 days, we're up to 1 million users. And I have one more slide because I want to save the rich kind of conversation for more dialogue, but just to kind of level set. So when we think about AI, you're going to hear terms like large language model, right? Or LLMs. And so that's what ChatGPT is. It's a frontier model. And so those are the models that have been trained on a huge amount of data, basically absorbing everything that's on the internet and then using that as a training set to be able to help people to generate photos and new content or things like that. Part of the conversation that we're going to talk about today is really going to get into the ethics and ownership and other kind of details. So I just wanted to show a few slides. I want to kind of say more of this, more so, for the dialogue. But I think it's important as you start to hear frontier models, LLMs, and then, what is ChatGPT, and other tools like BART and Claude and things like that. So I just wanted to kind of share that as kind of a jump off. And then I want to kind of open up the floor for me and Phoenix to have a more intimate dialogue, and then kind of bring the entire team into kind of like how they're feeling about the space that we're playing in today.
Yeah, thank you for that, Haj. I'm jotting notes here myself. the LLM, the learned language model. And I know that both, you and Phoenix and I had a chance to connect earlier before this conversation. And you really hit the nail on the head around understanding that this isn't something new, that this has been something that has long existed. I know Phoenix really uplifted that in our previous conversation, that this was around before it kind of came with this brand. The learned language model, this idea that there's already language that's in the universe, right, that is kind of being pulled together to be able to formulate a narrative or a model or a paper for a student, for example. I want to hear, a little bit from Phoenix. I know your background is more in like the kind of like data analytics, right? And like, can you speak more to the direction in which we're going, especially with there being an access to a tool or that could either be, helpful or harmful?
Absolutely. Every tool has that spectrum that's both helpful and harmful, and we've got to think about like, who's owning it, who's building it. So when we think about large language models and we think about the data sets that are used to train these models, a lot of times people say that, oh, it's just, humans have error. And so like the computer algorithms also have this error, but we have to think about like when we're training something that's on particularly one set of people, or if we're looking at like creative works and we're not thinking about the the use case around how did they get that data? Who signed off on it, right? There's all these questions that we need to ask. And there's, when we think about like the goal of the large language models for so many and for AI is to help make life easier, to make things more efficient, to be able to make more with fewer resources, with the goal of kind of freeing up some time, making things less dangerous for folks. And when we think about the creative process, and so something that sounds like Jay-Z, but it's not him, like, yeah, what is who gets that notoriety? And like, why do we get to say that the person who made the AI should get all of that? So all kinds of questions. And speaking from the data side of things, we really have to ask a lot of questions about the human side before we get to the tech side. Because when we look at the tech, like we mentioned earlier, that the technology's been here and it's being branded as AI because there's money in that right now. So there's attention in it. And so that's something that when we look at the AI as a something to fear, we're not going to really get the most use out of it. And what we want to have is the use. And I want to also add in that from the artistic side, there's the functionality of a tool to save us time and save us money. And then there's the creative side of how do we make something creative and fun and never seen before. So those are some thoughts to kind of also level set our discussion today.
Yeah, I think, just to kind of add to some of the points that you're talking about, technology has always been an extension of human intellect and intelligence. And so if we understand that, so even we go back and look at hip hop, we had drum machines, we had turntables. The technology was different, but there was always technology. And so the technology should be an extension of what we bring to the table. And the reasons why these conversations are so important is that we have to understand that there's a human component that the machine cannot duplicate, nor can it replicate. And that's the part that we absolutely have to figure out how we own. Now, at the end of the day, this stuff is going to move forward, and Elon Musk can't even pause it. I don't care how much money he has, because at the end of the day, this is not just an arms race of people, but it's of countries, and we're looking at governance and all kind of things like that. And so now, how do we become a part of that? And Phoenix really hit on a point. I don't know if we totally caught it in terms of, if we're not a part of these conversations in terms of training these models, I mean, we're not going to be a part of being able to fully benefit and optimize what this looks like. And so we have to figure out, do we want to be, and there's a great quote and then I'll pause, is that and I heard a good friend of mine, James Andrews, said, often the oil, but never the machine. And so we can be the part that gets used. We can be the part to make something hot. But how do we create stuff that other people have to then buy into and have to purchase? And we can make sure that we're part of that ownership component. And that's why these conversations are really important, because we need to make sure that we're not on the back end and we only get the crumbs off the table when millionaires are when people are going to be printing money from this stuff.
Yes, and I do want to hop onto that point. I'm so glad that you mentioned hip hop and music. If anyone recently watched the Ladies First documentary on Netflix, and it went in to talk about how, it was a lot of oil, like the big machines making a lot of money, but the artists didn't get to keep much of that. And that's a travesty. That's some of the traps that we walk into, but that's a human trap, not necessarily that the AI is doing it, but it might make it a little bit more pervasive when anyone can do it, like from something like a model. But even when we think about music and we think about like the ways that you create those sounds, thinking about how technology has allowed you to just press a button to make some of those sounds, whereas back in the day you didn't have that option. You were out there trying to just like scratch some things together, and it's like, how does this sound when these things tap together? How does that sound? What is the sound of a crow in the background? Like, how is that like contributing to it? But we then incorporate technology to make it easier for people. And so similarly, AI is making it easier for people. Whether you're the artist, you can use it for yourself. And some will unfortunately take from others to kind of make it their own. But there's a third component we have to think about, that sometimes we sample, right? We take things and we blend it together to make something new. So how do we look at the things that are blended together with language models that create something new out of many things that are old?
I think, and I think what it's also going to do is it's going to create brand new paradigms. So work is going to be different. And so if you're a designer, it's going to change the nature of design. If you are a copywriter, it's going to change the nature of copyright, right? So it's going to help us to buy time back, but we have to understand we can't just look at it through the old paradigm and say, hey, I'm going to do the same thing. So let's, let's do the use case. Let's say we're an artist and that artist has passed away, right? And so that artist is no longer here. And so let's just say that the artist wanted to do more philanthropic things and wanted to give back more. And that person's life was cut short. Is there an opportunity to have that estate say, okay, all right, we had this conversation, we wanted to do more, so now we want to be able to take the IP of this artist and create new stuff with the goal of being able to give toward some philanthropic purpose. So there could be a positive use case where the estate and the person that thought about this on the front end and wants to continue doing. There's probably going to be more cases where that's not going to be the rule, right? But what I want to say is, like, money takes on the nature of the holder. It can be good, it can be bad. There can be positive use cases, and let's figure out how we can create that, because whether we jump in or not, it's going to happen, and somebody's going to do it. But we are some of the most creative people on the planet. We just need to be a part of making sure we don't get left behind.
Exactly.
Yeah. So before I ask my question, I know that Pierre dropped a question here in the chat. Regulation is being considered. Has there been any indication that content issues with AI are included with the recent discussions in the U.S.?
There are. And I'll jump in a little bit, but so regulation does not keep up with technology, right? And so what's happening is that people are out creating stuff without the full regulation. Some of what I'm aware of, I think that if AI creates more than 50% of like books or technology, that you can't claim it as your own, right? I mean, so there's going to be some basic parameters from that particular standpoint, but then there are ways to go create stuff, and it can detect whether it's human, and you can go basically wash it, and you can, you know what I'm saying? So there are ways to do that stuff as well, and people are going to do that. Now, at the end of the day, part of what's interesting to me, and I think we'll have an interesting conversation, like, you know, it's like around this, is that how do we learn as human beings? Like, so I go into Instagram, I go online, I absorb information from those who have come before me. I don't always say, well, you know what? I looked at this YouTube video on it 2 minutes and 3 seconds after I saw this, and I attribute it to, I use it, and I kind of incorporate that into my design style, because I personally, I don't believe that there is anything new. Everything is a redesign. Everything, right? So, but if you created something and somebody is taking what you have created, I absolutely understand it from an artist standpoint. So again, the regulation is not keeping up at this point. It's going to be a moving target. But what's going to happen is that the stakeholders, like the record labels and they're going to do what they always do. They're going to look out for themselves, and it's going to be incorporated into the 360 and all the other kind of things. So it is going to be interesting. I don't totally know where it's going to land, but artists and creators are going to have to fight for everything to make sure that they get their just due.
Yes, and there are definitely a group of people, at least one Algorithmic Justice League led by Joy Buolamwini. She has a new book coming out. She had a documentary that was also out on Netflix. All of these people, these like social justice vigilantes of AI, they're having these conversations. They're bringing it to government. They're bringing it into the data rooms. They're bringing it into all of these conversations, but just like Haj is saying, it's moving so fast that it can't quite catch up. And we're used to a system where we wait for a precedent. We wait for something to happen before we deal with it. But now, more than ever, we have people who, they already went through that. They know that it doesn't work. They know that too many people will be taken advantage of if we wait until an incident to start creating precedents. So we're starting to engage in those conversations earlier. And so part of it is being in the room of creation, and part of it is being in the room for this regulation and thoughts and brainstorming ahead of time. What use cases might we see? And honestly, that's a place where we can engage with large language models. That's a place where we can say, hey, based on these things that have happened in the past, like these travesties, how can we prevent something in the future? It's not going to give us answers. That's one of the things that I like to really make very clear, that AI cannot give us answers. It can be the start of creation. It can be the start of brainstorming ideas. So one of the ways that educators, if we look at the educator use case, so many educators look at, are students going to cheat? Right? There's something that exists, and are students going to use it to cheat? If you focus all your time trying to prevent students from cheating, they're always going to find a new way to cheat. But if you say, hey, how do we incorporate this new tool into our learning so that our next generation knows how to use it, knows how to stay engaged in those conversations, and they know when new technologies come in later, because there's going to be something else. Right now, we're having this conversation. In 2060, we're going to look back and be like, oh yeah, remember when it was just AI? Right? We're going to look back on this. But what we can do is prepare them not just for AI and this revolution, we can prepare them for future revolutions, how to think about it, how to question it, how to set up those regulations. So I know it's a little bit of a left field from the question, but we got back there. We want to think about ways of how do we incorporate the tool that we have to make things better for the future.
I think just to add on to that point, I think the stakeholders always look at it only from their perspective. So the school is not really worried about the student. They're looking at it from the school's perspective. The record label, I mean, great record labels, they're looking at it from their perspective. And so those stakeholders are always going to look at, okay, how do I make sure I control my own interests? And so that's when we have to make sure that we're jumping into these conversations and being a part of it to say, okay, all right, I got to look out for myself, because the entity, are they really going to keep our best interest? And again, I don't know if you have a question, Chris. I don't want to.
No, I'm listening. I do have a question, but you can finish your thought or I can jump in.
Go ahead.
All right, cool. So, this is, you talk about left field. This is going to come really way left field. But as you mentioned about like schools, and I'm saying this because I have a, 16-and-a-half-year-old who's in college early, right? Like doing a great job. And I remember him coming home and explaining like chat GPT, PTQ. I don't know. Okay. And that he cannot reference this. I was like, well, what makes this any different than if you were just like to go to Google and ask Google the same question, right? Like these, as you mentioned earlier, Phoenix, in our one-off, right? Like there was already tools. It's the branding behind the name, which is bringing more of an emphasis. But it also reminds me of when folks start to have this kind of like either anxiety, right? This openness or this fear to AI. It reminds me of the medical field, right? So Arts Business Collaborative is certainly focused on arts, but also STEM. So we're talking a little bit about like from the arts lens, but what does it look like even from like the STEM lens? Well, there's already been robotics that are working in the medical field, right? That are already doing brain neurosurgeon, right? And as I think Haj pointed out, and Phoenix, you alluded to this as well, there's going to be a need of seeing that as a tool that is a benefit that you're working alongside, not as a threat, which most of our world is moving in the direction of anything that's new, anything that's being introduced that's unfamiliar to us is a threat. And so I don't know how I visibly see, and I don't know, Michael or Bianca or even Pierre, how you feel about AI or whether you use this in your workplace. I'm so new to it. I'm open to it. But Phoenix, I know that, you kind of have more of a STEM background. I want to hear more about where do you see AI either being helpful or harmful in the space of STEM, in the space of medicine. What would that look like?
Yeah, in the space of medicine, in the space of technology data, I saw AI personally as something that would be this tool that we can use. The fear that I had was less about people cheating, but more about will people use it in a way that might harm others, and how do we prevent that, both intentionally and also unintentionally? When you train a model that's focused on only one way, something could be right. The model will tell you that it's wrong, and now you have to work even harder to kind of prove yourself. And so in the tech world, like I see that it can be used to decrease the amount of time on something. So that's where we look at more of the functional side. And on the functional side, I see that we can use our time for more social good rather than working away a weed in the weeds of the technological like computation, and just adding a little bit more of the human side. When I look at it from my like technological lens, I see that there's more room for creativity if I can use the technology as a tool to reduce. But I think what I'm noticing from the kind of creative side is that they see it that it's taking away. And so I just want to add some balance that it can be both, but if we only ever look at it from the fear side and how it's going to take away, we're not going to get as much use out of it when we're not brainstorming the ways to move forward with it.
Yeah. I think, to that point, I think more than one thing can be true, right? And so lots of times people like to create absolutes around things that are not absolute. And so, I think it's human nature just to feel like, right, something that we don't know, because like this, even though it's been around since the 50s, this is like one of the first times where like everyday people are having a chance to be able to play around with it. And so a lot of there are things that we have to think about, and there's a term that's called frequency bias. And so if the messaging that goes out is only fear-based or false information, even when we see the real thing, we're still going, that negative impact is really going to impact us. And so I think some of it is, how do we get around and just start playing around with this stuff? So even if it's just going out into YouTube and watching different videos, to be able to get more familiar or just starting to play around with some of these tools. Not that you have to adopt them or you have to integrate them into everything you're doing, but I think just getting more familiar with it so you understand what's going on. And the other part is that, like, understand our data, we've already given up a lot of our data. If you post photos, they're embedded with stuff. We put stuff in social media. So the argument that nothing is out there, like our stuff is out there kind of already. And so, but if you do AI pictures, they're getting more data. But I mean, but the fact of, us not wanting our information to be out there, that ship is somewhat sailed. You still need to be careful. And again, I'm not saying to not be careful, but I don't want us to think that, like, hey, this is like virgin territory and our information has never been touched. We are the product. This stuff is, and we're going to continue to be the product.
And I really appreciate what you're writing, Pierre, because yes, it's an exploratory thing that's sort of guessing from a text-based side. And so going into a text model to ask it mathematical questions, that's also not what it's like meant for. And certain things you can repurpose them in different ways, and that's part of the creative process. But trying to get a mathematical answer out of a text model is just kind of, square peg, round hole kind of thing. It's not, sometimes people use it in a certain way and they say, look, it doesn't work. It's like, well, are you using it have you read the manual, right? Like, do we need to go back and start at square one? And I think one of the things we talked about before this conversation, Krista and Haj, we talked about how the things are, they're meant to be used in a certain way where, and people just aren't familiar with it yet. We need to get into the, how do we teach people to use it? How do we get them in the rooms? And the training of that is part of the teaching. I also want to go back to what you said, Krista, about like, you can't cite ChatGPT. You can ask ChatGPT to cite itself. That's one of the easiest ways for it to. So I've heard of asking it a question. It tells you this answer is correct. Are you sure? It's like, this answer is correct. You ask it to cite its sources. It goes back and it's like, based on this new information, I've rerun the models and it looks like something else, right? So this goes back to asking the questions. How do we how do we challenge it? We'll only grow from it when we're able to challenge it and see. Like, I actually really appreciate people asking it mathematical questions. We learned a limitation of it, and understanding where the limitations and the boundaries are, like learning where the boundaries helps us create better things in the future. So yeah, thanks for those points, Pierre.
And I think just to add to that too, it will, what I'm saying? So I was out of town. My daughter had a mathematical question. My wife typically helps her because my wife is smarter than me. So I tell everybody, marry up. All right. So she's smarter than me. But my wife was busy and I was like, okay, how can I help my daughter? So what I did is I said, take a picture of it, send it to me. I put it in ChatGPT, and it was about congruency and angles that are, if you have two parallels and you have a line through it, so what it did was I got enough information extracted from it that I could then figure out, okay, these two angles are equal. And I could speak to her about congruency because it gave me enough feedback that I could then, because I'm an engineer, but I haven't looked at this stuff. This is 8th grade math. 8th grade math is hard, y'all. I'm telling y'all, 8th grade math is no joke. But it gave me enough of a reference. And then I did FaceTime. No, I did FaceTime. And I was able to write on the screen and share. And so it was amazing how we were able to at least use it again as a tool. The same way if you go into Google, is everything in Google correct and 100% absolute? No. But I think if you use it as a tool, and to Phoenix's point, understanding his limitations to say, hey, but I did extract enough from it that I could then go to the next step, right? Because me starting from scratch and having to read this stuff, it would have been kind of difficult.
Yeah, I'm there. I can't keep up with either my children and their math. why there's tutors. There's experts in the field that know what they do. So I guess like, let's pull this back in a bit. I'm curious, right? Here I am an artist. I'm in footwork, or I'm a visual artist. I'm a social activist artist. What implications can occur for me if I were to be exploring, AI, whether it's to improve my work as an add-on to complement my work, or is it something that I should be working really closely? For example, those of us, Michael, you mentioned that you're in, I think, real estate development. Haj, I know, both you and I have our own social impact small business as well. How much do we work towards kind of like trademarking and like securing and holding our information, as Haj was alluding to, with like the the artists themselves, not the artists, but kind of like the publishing company, right? Like the record label. How much do you work to try to protect what is yours, understanding that it's actually probably a redesign, right? Like, we are all kind of inspired or moved by things that have occurred around us, which is what moved us to implement X, Y, Z. But do we help artists work towards protecting, or do we help encourage artists to begin exploring AI as a tool?
There's both. Yeah, it's not, I said it earlier, there's no absolutes. It's really about learning how to better protect yourself, and it's learning about how to use these tools to make your life easier, right? So we mentioned also earlier that this idea of we're going to choose the decision that's in our best interest and our individual interest. So how do then we minimize our time as an artist to say, like, okay, if I were to do this by hand, it's going to take this amount of time. Can you use these tools to help you grow and help your brand grow, but also being educated and well aware enough that putting your intellectual property into a model, then they might have something in the contract. You've got to really read the terms and services to determine whether or not they can take it and start to market it as their own. So that part, it's really about kind of knowing about the, like, what are you signing up for?
Yeah.
Yes. And so something to think about, like anytime I work with an entrepreneur, so how long are you going to wait to start? Right. So are we going to wait till all the conditions to be perfect and everything to line up? That's one way to do it. At the same time, somebody's eating your lunch, taking, and so you have that balance. I'm not saying to be reckless and to go out there and to just start, but is there a way for you to start? What if you don't have this huge budget for, a lot of the things that you want to have? I would rather be careful and start, right? And then figure stuff out like along the way. But then there are certain things that you need to think about, right? So so even though we start talking a lot about technology, what about the 1.0? Like, do I need a trademark? Do I have the domain names? Do I have the social media handles? Am I owning the conversation online? Because somebody could have all the other stuff, but I own the conversation. And and we talk a lot about first mover advantage, right? So thinking about those elements. So I don't want our business people or people to throw away some of those things that they need to be bringing into the conversation while they're learning this nuance as it relates back to AI.
Yeah. Yeah. What are, I guess you are really kind of emphasizing some of the, the benefits. And really what it is that until you actually kind of test the model or test the theory yourself to see if it's applicable to your work, whether you're an artist, if you're a teacher, if you're in STEM, if you're a student using, these tools, is it helpful? Is it harmful? I guess that's like the takeaway of really any movement, right? Like, you think about like chess, right? Like the game of chess, and like how you move and how you position yourself. What is your threat, and or what is like your leadway? Phoenix, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Good. So I'm using an example of my daughter. So my daughter loves to read books. Last year, she read 55 books. I shared that online, and my mother's like, "Oh, you used to read like that." I was like, "Mom, stop. I did not read that many. As a kid, I didn't read that many books in my whole childhood." So, so, and so she was physically reading books. Then she wanted a Kindle, and then she wanted audiobooks. And I was concerned as a parent. I was like, okay, is she not going to pick up a book? Is she not going to pick up the physical book? So that was a moment for me and my wife. What we realized is that there was times that she would start reading a book that she really wasn't feeling, and she wasn't going to finish it, but she might finish the audiobook, or she might finish the Kindle or whatever. Or when we travel, she's not carrying all these books with her, and so she can now carry more, and she can get through more books. And so what it told me was, you can add other forms of technology and not lose sight of the first one. And I'll close with this. Me personally, I buy books three ways sometimes. So I buy the physical book, but then if I'm doing research, I need the ebook I can type a word in, I can figure out where that's at in the book. Or if I'm running, I'm just listening to it. So I think figuring out ways to embrace doesn't mean that you have to throw away the way that we originally learned how to use, or we came in contact with whatever the thing was, but there could be another element that can enhance how you can consume, and be able to leverage that actual experience.
Absolutely. And actually, it's one of the things we have in common, Haj. I also will buy a book in at least two ways. Often, if I'm on a plane, I want to be able to listen to it. Sometimes I don't have the book in front of me, but sometimes I get a spot to sit and I listen to it, reading. I've got a pen and I'm taking notes in the book. I'm one of those, don't judge me. And we have to get creative with how we use technology. You mentioned chess. They're playing chess in like four-dimensional chess right now. Eventually, you run out of the way that technology is advancing, the way that our brains and as a human, we're advancing, that things are no longer as finite as we thought they were. Things are always growing. And we had a capacity at some point. Technology allowed our capacity to grow. So now we need something else to make it more fun, more exciting, to give it a few more options for us to, once you're able to build something that can predict the best way to get to the winning, end game, we need something new, which is ChatGPT, these large language models, these new ways to approach technology. So for the artists, how can the artists get more creative? It's what they do. We look to them. They're going to be the people that we follow when we want to use more creative things. So one of the things we talked about, the teacher, if they're worried about students using ChatGPT to create a paper, right? So that's an old way of thinking, that you say that you give the assignment as the write a paper. Now what you can do, one example is, here is a paper that I generated from ChatGPT. All of you now, where is it wrong? Where is it grammatically wrong? Where is it wrong in its facts? How would you make it better? How would you enhance this story, or this research? And taking it to the creative side, and less about the right or wrong, the creative side, art, right? Let's say that there's something that generates art. If you are worried that people are going to submit digital art that was not created by them, again, generate something on your own and say, how would you make this better? If this is a Victorian, if I asked this to create a Victorian painting from this specific artist, write a paper to me. What makes this Victorian? What makes this, what signifies in this art that it is particularly features of this artist? And then do something else creative. Make your own, what prompt do you create? What prompt do you enter for it to create a different time era, a different artist? And then also do your own, right? Like have it do both, a comparison of how would you do it. There are ways to get creative with it. And as a STEM data person, I have my own limitations. I'm sure that the artists of the world can think of even more profound, exciting ways to incorporate and expand our reach.
I feel like now
Right.
you've given me insight for like a homework assignment that I can create for my kids when it's like no school. I'm like, all right, I'm going to use ChatGPT to just like make something, and I'm going to have you go and revise it. But actually, so like kind of as we're talking about artists creating something and then pushing back on like the tools that are designed to help. What does that mean, I suppose, for what it looks like for copyright and or patent law, specifically as it pertains to artists themselves, visual, such?
Yeah, something to think about. I know, like, so even when I'm creating stuff, like,
Mhm.
so say for instance, if I'm creating a piece of artwork or I'm creating some kind of graphic, um, like, like there are ways to do it so that you're not quote unquote like stealing from a specific artist. So say for instance, I might design the prompt or write the prompt in a way that is more generic to the style versus saying I want Warhol blah blah blah, right?
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? So again, there are ways to do it to still let it do its magic and really kind of help you. One of the things that I think is powerful about generative AI is that it helps with what we call the blank page syndrome, right? So there are times where we start and we're like, look, I just need something to throw at the wall. I need something to start. And I think using it as a tool for idea generation, or some basic mock-ups to get the wheels turning, I think can be extremely powerful. The other thing is that everybody is not a graphic designer, right? So, but AI can help create an AI creative director because now if your mind is great at curating and thinking about ideas, you now have a you can now design in a way that you couldn't before because just because somebody buys a camera doesn't make them a photographer. Just because you buy sneakers, it doesn't make you a runner. Just because you buy Illustrator doesn't mean that you're going to be able to design great stuff. It just means that you own some software, own some shoes, and own a camera, right? And so, but I think this has the ability to be able to help you to be able to add a skill set and to be able to do something that that you might not have like that basic thing. And I'll close with this too. I think we need to really understand our genius. Like, so what is the thing? If AI didn't exist and we knew nothing about AI, what is the space that we want to kind of own and we want to kind of lean into? And I think we need to start there before we go all off into AI and become this thing, because it's so easy to look at the shiny ball and see what somebody else is doing to make money and say, I'm gonna go do that versus sticking and identifying what you do best
Mm-hmm.
and focusing there.
Yeah, I love that. The only part that I'm concerned about is when things that we've seen this happen in the past where someone will create something first and someone else will take that and they're the ones that make all the money with the same exact concept. So how do we prevent that? That's the part that I'm still questioning and trying to decide. How do we ensure that the person who created and inspired it still gets their recognition, but we also have to think about then maybe it's not the intellectual property that really sold it and that it's their celebrity status. Maybe it's their ability to go door to door, like even if it's something that's not AI, right? Like what allowed it to take off in that way? And there's unfortunately a lot of bias that will allow people to make money off of things that the underprivileged should have if they had that reach. But sometimes what we do best, someone else can take with less talent and skill and still make it thrive. So I don't know yet how we can manage that, but that's a big question that I'd like to be able to solve or at least brainstorm and some idea generation. So maybe we ask, these models to help us through that. But that's on my mind. I'm
So
curious your thoughts.
that's a human problem, right?
Yeah.
And so If we, I mean, as much as I love living in America and being a part of a capitalistic society, I look at things sometimes and I'm like, you were born on third base, and you hit a single, and now you think you're hitting home runs, and like so, there's some of this public policy that creating millionaires and billionaires and old boys club. And I'll give you an example. So like there's a class action lawsuit I think out now, and it's this guy who's been doing this stuff for eons, talking about affirmative action and talking about how it's so I think he used an example of Harvard University and going after African American students, but he didn't want to go after the people who donate and the people who take up the bulk of the things, right? And so now they're going after the Fearless Fund and other organizations saying that they shouldn't be able to invest in Black founders or Black business owners. Why is that, right? Because, and again, it's a totally self-serving thing when he's doing the exact same thing. He's doing the exact is doing the exact same thing. And so you're always going to have that element of people who are going to try to do like whatever they want for their own self-interest. The one thing that I would want is us who are, whether we're indigenous, people of color, or we come from social economically challenged backgrounds, is there a way for us to be able to come together in a way the Jewish community comes together? Or maybe, I mean, Mike have had some high level conversations like about this, like, does his community approach like creating opportunity for each other in a different way than other communities? And if we can find a way to kind of figure some things out that way, I think we could really start to I would love for AI to be a jump off point to create generational wealth.
Yeah.
Would love that.
And I would love that. And I see that all the time where there are community aspects that can help people. That's part of what ABC does, is helping people like get resources. It's all kinds of communities. We see in this country that there's a lot of like governmental protections that people just aren't aware of. And there are some families that are very good about using the systems that are in place in government to also add a layer of protection. So I would fully advocate for having some best practices for how do you protect yourself on the legal side, how do you protect yourself in the the financial side, how do you just kind of crowdsource ways to look at the basics of contract, look at the basics, like, and not just contract in paper, but when you sign that services agreement, when you use a technological tool, a lot of people just, it's a lot of words. It's a lot of words that if we read every single one of them, we'd probably still be stuck in the, the 90s. Like we're trying to be able to, and I know that there's been a lot of work, and going back to regulation around not making those online terms and services so long that people have to skip them. So there's definitely already been work there where they've gone through and made it so it has to be more clear so that someone could reasonably go through and read all of the points, a high level summary. And again, using the tools for creativity, having, if it's a language model and we wanted to actually use text, put the services and get a summary. It's not going to give you all the information and you don't want to miss any nuances. But you can find ways, if something is trying to be harmful, you can still try to use it to protect yourself and find a balance in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think,
sorry, I was going to just add that at least within the Black, Latina, Indigenous, social economically disadvantaged communities, right? Like we are prone to this like fear and mindset of scarcity. And so naturally, if we're collecting those gym shoes and we've got to a friend, who's like, oh man, you got the newest kicks. Can I like borrow them? Your mindset isn't necessarily like, I already got like 2 other pairs in different colors. I don't mind. You're more worried about like, how are you going to take care of them? Like, I bought these, like they're mine, right? Whereas like you could look to your peer and be like, I know you could use some shoes. Your shoes are looking a little busted, right? So how do we, and then like, and so when we think about, or even like artists, right? Like around, this particular conversation, right? Like AI and its effects on, right, intellectual property. How do we move the mindset away from scarcity and instead see it as collaboration? How do we see it as like, do you actually have a need for the, and Haj, I guess I'm kind of coming for you because I know you collect shoes, but like this idea of like having this whole set of shoes, which are like, a variety of colors, and we see like that neighboring peer, our brother, our sister, who we could be like looking to be like, let me go ahead. So like there's this fear factor, and I don't know how to move us as a people in the direction of not having a fear of scarcity. Again, even as a small business owner, I know that at the height, even maybe midway point of being a business owner, I was fearful. I didn't really want to talk to people about my business. I didn't want to like let them in. I didn't want to share my business model. Now I'm like shouting at the top of my lungs, like, who wants this thing? And feeling like and I know folks have their feelings about Elon Musk, but I'm like, if you can take what I have and you can do it 10 times, 50 times better, have at it. Because I also know that like my time is limited. I won't be here forever, right? So like if you want to redesign it, as Haj had alluded to earlier, if you want to redesign it in a way that could be more inclusive, more engaging, further reach the mission or the impact, have at it.
Yeah, I think, part of it is that people will look at what you do or look at what somebody else does. But the reality is that most people are not willing to put the work in. Like they might want it and they might say, oh, I could do this better. But but the reality is you could probably put the idea out there and you might have a few people who will be aggressive, but but the reality is that it takes work to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's the part that people really don't want to do. Like people will ask you questions because they just want to know the last 2 steps that you took so that they can figure out how to monetize it without doing any of the real, like, it's like everything that we've all done it's our life work. There's no losses, there's only lessons. So even the stuff that didn't work out, I figured out what wasn't going to work so I could make it work. And I think that's the part that people have to understand. But also just getting back to the whole scarcity thing, it's like I look at scarcity as being a good thing, at least from a business standpoint. Like there are tremendous opportunities that are connected with scarcity, and people love scarcity. Like they love stuff that everybody can't have, right? But everything doesn't have to be. It costs you $1 million to get it. I have some sneakers that are like, I love the New Balance 327s, and I felt like I was one of the first people to get those, and I get them in flavors that other people don't have, right? So I still get something other people don't have. But then there are other stuff that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get an elevated pair of this, but I can't get as many of those, right? And so, so again, I think it's your whole approach, but I think that as a community, we don't need to have a scarcity mindset in terms of opportunity. I look at it like I'm going to a bakery, there's an unlimited number of pies versus it being one pie. If you get a slice, there's less for me. And so I think if we are confident in what we do and focus on that versus what other people are trying to take from us, then I think we'll be in a better place.
Yeah. Definitely on that too. The idea is that we want to, rather than operating out of scarcity, remembering that there's abundance of opportunity, abundance to, yes, our time might be limited in what we can do, but in that time we can continue to create more and more. And just like you said, Haj, creating the scarcity, not the scarcity, but creating the value, right? Creating something of high value, and being more willing to collaborate with others, right? So yes, you can have these tools that can create something based on everything that it's been trained on, but the idea of 2 or 3 or 4 artists coming together and saying, hey, this is a one-time thing that we are doing. We have this value that the AI can create something that thinks that it incorporates us, but no, this is something that we are intentionally doing that is like a rare opportunity. finding ways as humans to do things that are still creative. Like just because we have high definition cameras doesn't mean that like we're still excited to see hyper realistic art. I saw art the other day that looked like a child's like like a child that drew like a cow or something, but like it was this giant painting that had such depth that it looked like if you tried to touch it, it would move, that it would be a piece of paper, but it was just a flat piece of art that you had to kind of, it's like an illusion, right? So that kind of thing can only be created like from far away. It looks like something that that a child drew, right? But then you realize the depth and the layer of it, and that's only something that this human could do maybe even the first time. Maybe then models get trained on it and they can start to do it, but someone did it first. Someone created that idea, and that person is not just creating value off of that painting. They are the person that thought, hey, here's an idea. They have more ideas, right? And as we talked about earlier, and Pierre wrote, like they're trained on past things, and it can generate guesses based on previous things. And humans are doing that too in a way where we're creating ideas that are new and exciting and different. And how do we, yeah, just focus on that. Focus on the human side of what value we're adding, not just what output we're making.
Is
Also,
AI, sorry, is AI giving, you're mentioning like this, this cow. Is AI giving the same credit towards the artist who made the original piece as we see? And I'm saying this because I'm thinking of like social media on Facebook. I don't do it, but like folks will have like music attached to something, a video. It's called a reel. This is how like outdated and uninformed I am with like anything social media like. But they'll say like I don't own these rights, right? They have to acknowledge, is AI also having to, as a genuine question, is AI having to do the same? Like we don't own the rights to this cow that was originally made by XYZ.
It's not doing that right now, but that's something that we can incorporate. And I will say that humans were not very good at this. Early days of social media, people were just pulling random things. People are still posting things, and they're writing new captions to things that other people made, adding new context to it. And now I'm seeing people, you know, the first comment is like, I got it from this person. And there's better, what is it called? Like,
I mean, I don't know, attribution.
not just attribution, but in like a photo, the watermark, right? There's a little bit better watermarking now. Even the technology will do, you'll see like a little thing that has their, is it TikTok? It has the original creators, like it has the original creators like handle kind of in the corners. And so people will make something out of the old one. When they make the new one, now you're starting to see the layers of how far. Some people will still decide to crop those out. And when they crop those out, they are intentionally trying to, you know, work around this nature of citation. Difficulty with the large models is that they're pulling from so many things at once that the goal would be that you wouldn't really recognize it as any one artist that it's kind of pulling from. But if it's pulling from, you know, 1,000, right? Because you need a lot of data. You need a lot of data. And let's say it's primarily using 1,000 different things. Ideally, it would have like a end of Marvel movie credits long 1,000, you know, names of people and websites that it pulled from. But yeah.
Oh wow.
Maybe one day. And you can start to see like, okay, my name or my unique handle is attached to maybe 10 times this month, my unique handle has been tagged by these models, and we start to get notifications like LinkedIn, like, oh, I've just been referenced in another model. Maybe one day we'll get that, but
yeah. So it's interesting. So say for instance, if somebody has a beat, right? So what makes one beat, and again, like, I'm not a musician, so like what makes one beat different than another beat? And I know you have to differentiate enough so that this is like your beat. But say for if you create something, you hear, okay, all right, so I heard Timberland do this, I'm gonna change this up. And so now this is mine. But I was really inspired by him, but people who are in music know that it's different, it's legally different. So are we looking at the legality of if it's legally different or the ethics side of it? And so that's where it's going to get kind of like, okay, all right, nope. So this is legal according to the law, but we all know that it was inspired by this over here. Now I have to pay this person because I was able to change a bar, I was able to change something from it. And again, if we haven't got if we haven't solved that in other aspects of creativity, what's going to happen with AI is it's just now the stuff is going to be done at scale. So if it's misinformation at scale.
Wow.
We're going to start to get into political. I don't know if it's going to happen during this political cycle, but in the future political cycles, when you start getting into deep fakes and start getting into all these other things, it's going to be total mayhem because I can literally go out, I can use 11 Labs, I can use a lot of these other things. I could create commercials. I could simulate the voice of a candidate, and I could create stuff and put stuff out there that sounds and looks like a candidate. And so now when you have that mixed in with the real stuff, what is real? If you hear it 1,000 times, do you now, you know what I'm saying? So again, we're gonna get to a place where if you're not physically in the room when something actually happened, did it really happen? And we're really moving towards what's real, original, fake, and a variety of other things it's gonna really challenge integrity and challenge a lot of how we interact as human beings.
Right. And I will add that while I'm not an advocate, I'm not advocating here for cryptocurrency, but one of the things that blockchain was supposed to do was give us an ability on the technical level to determine who created something, and then their ownership would be able to be recorded in a chain of events, a ledger of events. That's not something that we're talking about right now because that was so what, 4 years ago, 3 years ago? That conversation is still there. Even if it's not blockchain and it's something else, there might need to be some sort of, because we can't be in every room all at the same time. Everything Everywhere All at Once is just a movie that's very different, but being able to have some sort of technological stamp like that is within reach. It's not necessarily here today, but it's something that we can work towards. That's part of the creative process. And again, rather than looking at the fear only, just looking at the opportunity of how do we get people cited and monetized? How do we get them all of their due?
Yeah.
Also, is it possible, I know we're getting close to the end. I want to see, can we open up the floor like for some conversation, because I know that we've been trying to share our perspective, but I would love to be able to hear if there's, if anyone else online has some thoughts or they have questions or things that as a community we can kind of chop up.
I'll throw my 2 cents in. I feel like this entire conversation was super enlightening and inspirational because these are the things that I think about on a constant basis. I myself actually, as a younger person and still to this day, as you can see, I love music, right? So I used to make beats. I was a DJ for a good 13 or 14 years. So the process of music and even the transition from what we referred to back in even the 90s from analog to digital is always something that I reference as a really important shift insofar as accessibility to young artists. I think there was a time at which when I was, when I first got into music and I really got into electronic music and hip hop and even dance music and everything else, it was like I was 17, 18 years old, and there was no chance of like buying these expensive synthesizers and everything that it actually took to sit down and make music, you know. And so I think the point of this comment is we crossed a lot of territory insofar as creativity and the, you know, is AI, for example, like, you know, going to potentially kind of take the place of creativity or certain processes, etc. Well, one of the things that we see in music when you reference and you look back at music as a model for, you know, where we're at in the human process with technology, etc., is, you know, you see this really like almost an elimination of, I'm 45 years old, and when we were teenagers, when I was a teenager, everything was a genre. You know what I mean? And it's so fascinating to me now how explosive and like how different music is from artist to artist. Like so much of it is just this cross pollination and just this, like, you couldn't put a genre on it, right? Even hip hop. I mean, you listen to hip hop now, and there's some really beautiful production coming out. For the most part, since I'm an old head, 90s hip hop was everything for me. So I can't, like, I won't even compare, right, to that time. But there are some incredible artists that are taking all of this technology and all of these tools basically at their disposal and doing really incredible things with them. So it leads itself back to like what we were talking about insofar as the actual artist and the creative process, etc. It's about using the tools. It's about embracing the tools, right? It's basically about, you know, just getting in. I mean, I've messed with a few decks and a few presentations lately where, like Haj was saying, I needed a jump off point, right? So I just like, I let AI like shoot me a sentence, and I'm like, oh, that's good. Now I'll edit it. You know, I also went to school. When I went to college, I was like a minor in literature, and one of the troubles that I always had was getting all of these thoughts down and consolidating so I could just have like a jump off point. And now if like AI spits me a paragraph, I'm like, oh, sweet, because now I get to be an editor instead of be like the actual writer, right? It's the idea that I'm trying to go with and the direction that I'm trying to go in, but I can edit it to make it mine. You know what I mean? And then I guess one of the other points that always pops up in my head, and even one of the reasons that I decided to start a brand, because I am in commercial real estate, etc., but you know, is because the one thing that AI and technology, no matter how far we go into the future, etc., we will always have our own story, right? Everyone has their own story. Your story is completely unique. Every single one of us in here, every single human being's story is unique. So the more that you look to, I think, you know, create value in this day and age, even as an artist or as a human being, the more you understand your story, the more you'll realize that you yourself are a resource and are a reservoir that will never tap out. You know, it's not like, oh, you know, even if you had a great idea but somebody else had it, guess what? You got more. You know, like you gotta keep going. And if even if it helps you to, like, you know, but I mean, it's like that in life. We draw inspiration from everywhere, right? And we should be drawing inspiration from everywhere. I'll listen to everything from like classical music to old folk music back to, like, you know, hip hop and everything, right? Because it's always feeding me. So I think that's more important, and maybe that's the linking point for us as a community in general, is to understand how to use these tools to better tell the story that we want to tell about our unique experience as a human being, whether that's, again, our heritage, whether that's like what we love, whatever it is. If we're using the tools to help amplify that, there's some commonality for us. And I think it shows in the creative landscape right now. And again, using music as an example, but it's so there's so much music. Like, there's so much music out there right now. And when it, you know, 15 years ago, this was not the case. It was really, really difficult to produce a piece of music, and it was expensive, and it was, you know, and so we see like a total different explosion of creativity. Some better, some for better, some for worse, right? I mean, but at the same time, I mean, those are just a couple of the points, you know, that came to mind. Is definitely accessibility, and you know, young people or even people like whoever, any artist who wants to express themselves has a very smaller barrier to entry than it was, you know, decades ago, when you needed money to buy equipment, and it was expensive, and it was like, you know, so yeah, there's a lot of good that comes with it, I think, for sure. But it's something to think about too, for sure. So that's what I want to throw in there. And in fact, I have to jump because I have to go pick up my kid from school. But I wanted to thank you all, because this was very inspirational and definitely enlightening for me, and it gave me a lot of new ideas too.
Thank you for
Oh,
that.
yes, sir.
All right.
Well, thank you. I'm like, before you jump, if you have a chance to answer this question, it's for, you know, you, Haj, maybe you both know. Who really came up with the first beat to like Mary Had a Little Lamb or Twinkle Twinkle or ABCD? Right? Like Chat ABT, right? Like, again, we had this beat, this verse, and it has been interwoven. And in my head, when my children were younger, and they'd be singing like Twinkle, you know, we all began to grow to understand like that's the same beat. But who
Right.
made that beat? Does
Yep.
anyone know who made that beat?
I might look that up. That's a great point.
Same. Yeah, I'll look it up. That's
All
good
right.
homework.
That's our homework.
It was.
But no, we
it
got
was
two other people on it.
I'm going to give some misinformation and say it was the Fat Boys that came up with that beat.
So you're Google giving us the
But
answer.
it's misinformation. I'm being fair. It's misinformation.
What was that movie where they were like, first the Fat Boys break up, now this?
Well, thank you all. Bianca or Pierre, do you all have any questions or thoughts, feedback?
I'll give one quick one real quick. I know I know Krista's heard me. I have to actually jump off here in a bit. I'll say this real quick. First of all, this is a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. I think there's a lot that we're still going to learn in terms of balancing between using AI productively. Like Michael said, it's a paradigm shift. And also Phoenix brought up the same thing. It's a paradigm shift in terms of how we present our story and how we use the tool. And Phoenix, by the way, I really love the suggestion you brought up about, you know, creating something in AI and then letting the class kind of figure it out. That's actually a big deal. As I said in the chat, it's a text calculator for all intents and purposes. And I'll say this from an analytics standpoint, people are still learning how to incorporate AI at some level, just because it's here. But I think with technology, we have to be, we need to be afraid of FOMO, which is, somebody had this at a conference, fear of messing up at some level. Just because I think that's happening with everybody right now, because the barrier of information and what to do with that information has been lowered so much. And we've seen this now for bit by bit by bit, even in, you know, in terms of music. You know, think back in the day in the 70s, you used to have a full band, and you have to have a sound engineer to create that sound that people that really love, whether it was a Motown sound, whether it was Earth, Wind, and Fire, whether it was the Silvers, you know, yes, I'm going that far back. But but then when you start thinking about, you know, when we get to hip hop, love hip hop, don't get me wrong, but we get into samples. Real quick piece of trivia. The one person who got sued over the use of a sample, remember how samples, people were like, well, yeah, you're retreading music and that type of thing. The one person who got sued, ironically, was Michael Jackson. On the album Dangerous, the introduction to Will You Be There, there was a little bit of controversy because it was technically a sample, a classic music sample that was like a minute and some seconds change. And there was debate about how long that sample could be. And the irony was, it was a suit between Sony and technically a division of Sony who had the rights to that actual music. And they worked it out. If you look at the later album covers, there's actually a reference to that. But I bring that up to say that I think as we use things is where the law starts kicking in a little bit. There's always this balance between when something is new, you don't want the law to rush in and stop innovation. But at the same time, to the points that was brought up and raised, there needs to be some level of guidance. And I think there's always going to be a little bit of a struggle for everything right now. So I say that to say it's going to be interesting. Pay attention to a lot of the cases. There's one with a guy who I think was the creator for Game of Thrones who just opened a case up, and I think it was something in regards to creative rights versus AI. We're going to see much more of it. So I'm going to say that, and I do need to jump because I got to prepare teaching, but this was great, and thank you. And Hodge, always my best to your family, best to your wife and everybody. I'm always there. Phoenix, thank you. Bianca, pleasure to meet you. Michael, pleasure to meet you. Krista, definitely I'm going to follow up with you on LinkedIn. Pleasure to meet you, and everybody enjoy.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I appreciate Phoenix and Haj for sharing this conversation with me and with those who've joined us. And this video will be shared more broadly. Haj and Phoenix will also share it with the two of you so that you can share it out with your networks if you so choose. But I appreciate everyone here and for joining in on this really important and impactful conversation. Enjoy the rest.
All right, let's get it.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.